Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Burns, the Director of the Business Insight Center, and welcome to our November edition of the Cannabis Industry Meetup. We are super excited to have Jeremy Schwartz here from Kind Brands, who's going to discuss how to operate a retail dispensary. So if you want to, Jeremy, do you have a preference of saving questions till the end or as they arise?
Yeah, let's save them till the end.
Okay, all right. So you can put any questions you have into the chat and we will address those at the end. And Jeremy, you have the stage.
Perfect. Well, as Jennifer mentioned, I'm Jeremy Schwartz, the CEO of Kind Brands, where we provide management and consulting services to retailers. We'll get into it a bit more in depth shortly. But thanks, Alicia and Tyra, for joining us. I'm just going to share my screen and we'll go into the presentation. Okay. So one thing that we really believe about retail cannabis is that success in retail cannabis is driven by people. That's the partners you hire to help you design and build your store, the staff that you'll bring on to help run the day-to-day operations of the business, as well as the companies that you choose to source your product from, and other vendors that you'll work with to help operate the store. Now, we really believe that without a trustworthy network supporting you along the way and strong relationships between these groups, the business just won't thrive, and your customer experience will suffer because of it. So you'll hear me kind of refer back to this throughout, that people really drive success in retail cannabis. So we'll go first through a bit of an overview about our company, just to give you a sense of like who we are, what we do, and why you should really care about the things I'm going to tell you after, which is things you should focus on and think about as you go to open a retail cannabis operation, as well as some of the operational challenges that you may have once you're open and operational. So first, a bit about Kind House. So some of the things that we believe, in addition to success being driven by people, that we want to help create a future that continues to unlock the good in cannabis. And we truly believe that we're just scratching the surface of what this amazing plant can do. We also believe that who we partner with and how we go to market really matters. And that helps us ensure that the impact that we have on our communities is both positive and profound. In terms of some of the things that we value that drive us and kind of guide us every day, I'm not going to go super into detail on what's on the page, but it really kind of boils down to focus, detail, and integrity. We really think there's a lot of people in this industry that are obsessed with being first and fast and just getting things done by cutting corners and by brute force. And we think the exact opposite. It's such a challenging space in terms of being regulated, and there's so much compliance and so much competition that we really think that focus and being detailed and acting with integrity and operating with integrity matters so much. So in terms of what we do, we are experts in making the critical decisions that determine if a retail cannabis operation will thrive in, as I mentioned, highly regulated and hyper competitive environments. Like, we're super excited for the first 150 licenses to come out in New York, but there's going to be another 1,000 right behind that, right? Like, you may not think there will be. It happened. I have 10 other markets that we can introduce you to people who thought they were going to be in a limited license market, and then it opened up. And so there's just a lot of really critical things that you need to think about and do to thrive in that environment. And we'll talk about a lot of that today. In terms of our capabilities, kind of boils down to three things. We can help you find a site, run your business, and source capital. Our two core focuses are on the real estate and store operations. We do have a lot of people through our network who have both equity and debt capital that they're interested in putting into the industry. But our actual true core focus is on finding sites, securing sites, and helping run the business. So a bit about our team. We're led by a team with a record of success over decades in cannabis, retail generally, real estate, and tech across North America. We're very fortunate to be advised by some major leaders within our space. And we're also fortunate to have founders who have a long track record of success. And as I mentioned to Jennifer previously, I owned and operated one of the first dispensaries in downtown Toronto, and also had another business prior to that. And fortunately, I'm amongst the least interesting people on my team. We have some really great other people who support what we do, including Bernard Birnbaum, who's actually based out of Rochester, our director of real estate. And he has a long track record of owning commercial properties and being a developer. So that really gives us a unique insight as we go to help our kind of retail licensees. This is a quick look at some of the brands that people on our team have helped build, either built the actual brand or supported building the company. In terms
Wait,
of
can I pause you for a second?
Yeah.
SC Johnson.
Yeah, it was a major consulting role for someone on our team that helped them rebrand the company.
Oh, okay, but so this is not the list of cannabis.
No, some of
people
these
that have got.
yeah, some of them are cannabis, like Tokyo Smokes, Tweed.
Okay, yeah, I got that, but I was just like, is SC Johnson Wax getting into the cannabis business? Okay, sorry.
Not yet. I'm sure they will be.
Yeah, give it time, right? Give it time. Okay, sorry.
Once they won't get delisted from the stock exchange. Yeah, so in terms of our current brand portfolio of the two retail brands that we have J Supply Co. And Northern Helm. I'll show you a couple mood boards that kind of give you a feeling of the brands in a second. They have 11 stores combined, over 100 staff who are really focused on creating exceptional experiences for their customers. And when we partner with groups, like, we're not obsessed with increasing our store count. Like, there's a lot of groups that may partner and try and like force people to use their brands. We have these available, but they're not something that we like force upon people. Like, they're ready to. We have stores built. They're fully built out concepts. You could, or someone could approach us and license these brands, but we also provide services to groups who want to build their own brand. And can layer that on top of our operational excellence platform that we have, and will in the end help that brand thrive. So this is a bit of a look at J Supply and this in-store picture. It's definitely more an urban type brand. I mean, both these brands work anywhere, but these stores are typically more urban, more focused on targeting kind of the mid-20s male. But as with any brand, you have your target persona, and then especially in cannabis, there's a lot of people who consume cannabis, and they're not always the person you've built your brand around. And Northern Helm's a kind of a bit more focused on the mid-30s female who is looking for an approachable shopping experience in cannabis, and that's a bit of a look at it there with a couple of in-store shots. So that's enough about us. We'll get to the meat of the presentation, and the first thing I want to talk about is like, what are the most important areas to focus on when you're trying to open a retail cannabis business? And for us, there's kind of 6. There's a lot of things, but they kind of boil down to 6. It starts with the application, and then we go into site selection and acquisition, as well as talk a bit about the local support component, raising capital, and your store design and build. So in terms of the application, I mean, the key thing is, getting your application right is the first step on your journey. It's a super important step, but there are a lot of things that happen after it. But it's one of the most important things because it starts your journey. And there's a lot of times I'll get questions on things that are just in readily available documents, and a lot of times people are relying on other people to try and like fill in their knowledge gaps. These things are easily accessible, right? The regulations are starting to come out in New York. We don't have application rules for the general application, but obviously, they existed for the card applications, and I would imagine they would look fairly similar in the next rounds. And so, just becoming super familiar with this is very, very important. And not having to rely on other people to give you kind of a base understanding of the types of documents or timeframes or deadlines, ownership rules, how, priority application, like how are applicants being prioritized? Do you what do you qualify for? There's also the state level licensing, but there might end up being, hopefully not, but there might end up being local municipal licensing processes that get rolled out, which we've seen in pretty much every other market. Something to think about too is just like, what do I have to have ready?
Sorry, can I back you up there? Additional licenses at the local level. Can you explain what you mean about that a little more?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Like what we're seeing in New Jersey in particular, to give an example. So there's a state level license, right? And you get a conditional license or you go for an annual license. I won't get into the nuances of those, but conditional license, I don't need real estate in advance. And I don't need like local support. So at that point, I get this first license, I can go to try to locate my business, secure a site, and obviously try to secure capital. But in New Jersey, you need local approval. Well, some of these municipalities came up with their own licensing process. And we really hope that that doesn't happen in New York. Obviously, it's a little early. The MRTA doesn't specifically say they can't do it. It says that they can't come up with rules that make operating the business unreasonably impractical.
Right.
I
can speak to that a little for the city of Rochester.
Sure.
There will not be, you will be required to get a business permit, not an additional license. And as long as you're operating within the approved zoning areas, then you're fine. The zoning areas should be approved by the city council at their next meeting. But other than that, the city proper of Rochester wants to make it as easy as possible for you to operate.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, this is more just kind of general stuff to think about, like maybe some of the people who watch.
Oh no, I know. I just for our attendees just want to know.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to know. And I'd seen that they had just approved or proposed some additional areas to include for the zoning. So that was good to see more areas being added, because often what you see is like less happens, which is super frustrating, and some of the major challenges that we're seeing in New Jersey. So in terms of site selection, I mean, you're operating a retail business, so location is super important, and choosing the right site is imperative for success. And kind of what I alluded to earlier in terms of why we think being detailed and focused matters. A lot of people will just rush and they'll choose whatever site's available and not even factor in, like, is this would I locate a restaurant here? Would I locate another retail store here? Is this a good space, or am I only choosing it because this is cannabis and I want to get open? And so that's just something that we really stress is the location. Also not going too big. I think some of the bigger cannabis companies in the States have focused on building these huge 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 square foot dispensaries, and it's kind of skewed people's perception as to what they need. I mean, the bigger you go, ultimately, the higher your build cost, the higher your staffing costs, and the higher your rent. Like, we ideally like our stores to be 2,000 square feet at most. So just to give you a sense of how we think of that. Zoning compliance is really important as well. While there might not be additional licensing considerations at the local level, pretty much every place that opts in has zoning considerations. And so just, they're not that hard to understand. The most important being, are there any setback rules? Like, do I need to be a certain distance from a school, a church, a daycare? And what zones within the city, like what zoning codes can I locate this business in? Unfortunately, again, not to use New Jersey as an example, but like they've come up with quite restrictive zoning ordinances down there in certain towns that opted in, but through the zoning make it very, very difficult to locate these businesses. And so you might have, and I know Rochester's not doing that, but just in general, like, it's something that it happens fairly often.
We still have the 250 feet from a house of worship or a school or whatever. So we still have those.
Yeah, 500 feet from a school and 250 from a house of worship. I mean, that's what was in the MRTA anyways.
Yeah.
What we're seeing is even like Orchard Park and other, the problem is everyone's rushing to get live, but most of the municipalities that have opted in New York have not written their zoning ordinance yet. And so while these places in theory have opted in, like you can't locate there until they pass these zoning ordinances. And so anyway, so just to give people, some sense of the things that they'll need to think about in terms of, understanding the zoning rules. If possible, I understand cost is a significant consideration, like partner with people who understand the industry, whether that's a real estate, a realtor or a broker, or a lawyer, consultants, accountants. There's no shortage of people in this industry who project as experts, unfortunately, and it is tough, but like just if you're going to work with people, try to get some references, check in to have who have they worked with previously? Do they have a track record of success of winning licenses or helping build out businesses, stand up businesses, design a brand, whatever you're focusing on. Another thing that we find goes overlooked is just trade area considerations. I mentioned it previously about people rushing and just choosing whatever retail site. Like it's really important to think about too, like who's your target customer, right? Like ideally you want to be locating in a community where those people live, or parts of a community where those people live or shop or travel through. Where do they shop? What's their lifestyle? What is there a co-tenant that you want to locate near? Like, would your customer shop at Target or Whole Foods or Costco, or like what, just certain things to think about in terms of retail location that like almost any other retail business would do, but we're just finding is kind of lacking in locating cannabis businesses, often due to zoning rules. So I get that restriction. In terms of acquiring a site, there's kind of the lease versus buy concept. But regardless of how you're going to secure a site, it's a multi-year commitment, and being really diligent on the site is super important. Whether it's a lease or you're going to try to acquire a site and then take out a mortgage, often you'll likely have to personally guarantee the lease. And so thinking, do you have enough assets to be credit worthy from a landlord's perspective or from a bank's perspective to guarantee that lease? Will you need to bring in a partner who can be that person? These are some of the practical challenges that we see in the space, especially because, and we'll talk about it in the capital raising, but like banking is such a challenge right now, at least until they pass safe banking or other reforms to help more competition come to the space. Is the lease, it says N, that's that means triple net. And really what that means is like, are you paying all of the operating costs for the building? Are you paying the taxes, maintenance, and insurance, the utilities for the space? Or is it an all-in cost for the lease? A gross lease is what they would call it. Often we see in this space landlords including percentage rent, which is a term that basically means, are they going to earn a percentage of your revenue? It's a very common thing that happens in malls and other like high-end retail sites, but we've seen it very often in cannabis where you go through, you're in the process of securing a site, and then they'll throw in a percentage rent clause where basically they're now benefiting from your success. And if there is percentage rent, is there a break point? Meaning, like, does it stop somewhere? Like, if you do $5 million a year in sales, like, are they making money off of every dollar, or does it stop at a certain point? In terms of some like site-specific stuff, like what condition is it in, and what was the previous use? Like, if it was a restaurant, were they dumping grease down the drains? And that's going to give you plumbing problems in the future? Is it going to take a lot of demolition to turn it into a dispensary? One thing that we always recommend, whether you're getting a lease or buying, like just get an inspection. It's a couple $100, and it'll give you peace of mind just having someone who really understands how to determine the condition of a site, and give you an independent assessment of it. And also just look, are there any concerning site features? Like, is it easy to get in and out of there in a car? For example, does it have good parking? Is there good lighting? Does it have good base building systems, meaning like the HVAC systems, the electrical, the plumbing? Are there any issues with that? Which would, all of that would show up in an inspection.
If I could just interject and ask, so one of the things we hear a lot is that, people will, apply for a lease and they're quoted a certain price, and then the landlord finds out it's cannabis and doubles it or triples it. Are you finding that to be like common practice? And is there anything you can do to combat that?
It is the industry, unfortunately. It's not even common practice. It's like, it's the practice. It's extremely frustrating.
Is that and that's legal, I'm assuming.
I mean, it's legal because you sign a contract saying you'll pay the landlord that rent, right? Like, that's the problem.
Well, no, I mean, like, for them to say before you sign the lease, for them to then find out that, oh, this is cannabis, which is a perfectly legal business, and then to jack up the rent.
Yeah, I mean, typically how commercial leases work is you have to say what the use of the building is, right? Like, you can't say it's going to be a coffee shop and then make it a dispensary. Like, you'd be like breaching the lease, right? So that's how they get that. That's typically where it comes up. I don't find,
Okay.
yeah, I don't find often like landlords are finding out like at the day they're signing a lease, or like, you know, like it comes up in conversation. It's like, well, what are you using the space for, right? And that's typically how it comes up.
The other question we get is like, if this is what landlords are going to do, isn't it just easier for me to buy my own building?
Easier, I wouldn't. It's better for sure. It's difficult. So greedy landlords is a problem. Even if you have a landlord who really wants to lease to you, their bank might not let them, right? So obtaining financing to buy a property is very difficult in this space. Just because of all the challenges that the industry has with the lack of access to proper financial, services, right? And so, we've even had a situation where we've gone through, we were ready to lease a site. The landlord was good, their bank was good, but they actually had a tenant, like a major tenant in the same, whatever, like strip mall, right? And they had actually given that tenant right of refusal on like uses. So actually it was the tenant that didn't want a cannabis business in the same strip mall that they were in. So the landlord was good with it, the bank was good with it, and then it ended up being, a tenant.
That's unfortunate, because that cannabis store would have brought in a lot more foot traffic than
Yeah. So there's
that
a
would
lot
have helped that other store, most likely.
Totally. Yeah. And like this is where we're at in the cycle, right? Like
Right.
it's super frustrating, but this is just
It
the
is.
reality. This is just the reality. And this is why, like, in this presentation, I'm trying to give you like the real perspective of like the things to think about in the industry, because a lot of times I think there's like glamorization of, all right, you just open a cannabis store and you're going to make $10 million a year, right? Like, look, there's businesses that do very well, right? But there's a lot of planning, a lot of thought that goes into most of those success stories. There's a lot more people who don't put the thought and effort in that end up on the flip side of that, right? And are open businesses they wish they had never gotten involved in, unfortunately. So I just want to talk about local support. It's often like a hidden barrier in the community, and it shows up a lot of times because people will, and I'm not, again, this is not about Rochester, it's just to frame people's perspective on some of this stuff. Like, it matters a lot sometimes having ties to the community, especially if, for example, let's say you find a really great site and it's not in the zone that you need to be in, or it's too close, it's 10 feet too close to a school or something like that, and you need to get a variance. Well, now the community gets to weigh in, right? Or you go to a community that has, for some reason, has these, other processes involved to get a license or special permits or whatever, right? So like, it's something we're seeing show up in a lot, Massachusetts, New Jersey, other markets, that it's really mattered having like good ties to your local community. And often, unfortunately, they're like political ties. And so it's just something to flag for people to think about. That fostering that support is very helpful. Whether, even if it's simply just for something as basic as like including a letter of support from your local state senator with your application as an additional thing to submit, right? We found that to be helpful. So in terms of capital raising, yeah, I just want to make something kind of clear that I think like giving up equity in business often gets kind of demonized and seen as predatory. Like equity is your friend in raising capital. It helps you not have to borrow money but use it to your advantage, right? And in terms of thinking about how much capital you need, like really put in some serious thought and planning as to like how much money do you need to get open and cash flowing. Like what's your build out going to cost, and don't forget to include things like what we call soft costs. There's kind of three costs in a build out. There's the soft cost, which is like how much does it cost to get a building permit? How much does it cost to get plans that you could submit for the building permit? Do you need an architect? Do you need an engineer? Do you need other consultants to provide reports for that permit? Your general design for the store itself. Then there's hard costs like actual like construction costs, and then there's owner contributed costs like fixtures and security systems and point of sale systems and all that sort of stuff. Also, signage is a huge consideration. It's an under focused thing. It's not that expensive, but there are long lead times. So just in terms of thinking about all the things you need for the build out, then you need inventory, and there's going to be additional startup costs associated with getting open and training your staff and having people on payroll prior to opening. And then
just to at the Business Insight Center, we do have access to PitchBook.
Amazing.
So if you are looking for venture capital, private equity of any sort, we can connect you with those firms that are partial to cannabis, or there are firms that do nothing but cannabis. But yeah, you have to give up some equity. Like it's, so, and yeah, don't like Jeremy said, don't be afraid of that. But
yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of like a look, there's no doubt we talked about it before, like there's no doubt there are predatory things happening in this industry, but I think people are getting very obsessed with like every percentage point. And look, like it's a tough environment right now to raise capital in this space, especially with kind of what's happened with interest rates and the capital markets over the last 6 to 9 months. So like I said, like 50% of something's better than 100% of nothing, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, and it doesn't matter what industry you're in. If you get venture capital, you're giving up equity.
Yeah, exactly.
You're giving up board seats. You're giving up whatever. Nothing's for free, right?
And look, just as we've said all along, people determine success and being diligent and focused. Like you're marrying your business partner, right? So vet them and get to know them and get previous references. Like all this stuff really matters. A lot of people are really good at selling up front, and then as you get to know them a little more, that's kind of when the relationship tends to fall apart. So vetting them up front is super valuable. So the last thing in terms of opening considerations, find design and build partners as much as possible. I know like in Rochester, there's not a ton of people who have previous experience in cannabis, but to the extent possible, find design and build partners with experience, and it'll help you avoid major headaches. Things to think about is like, who's going to manage the construction? Is it someone on your team? Do you need a general contractor? Just thinking about like the challenges that can occur working with unionized labor. Not that I have any issue with it, but just like there are things can get delayed, right? Sourcing raw materials. It's been a major challenge over the last couple of years. Steel studs, like there was times when it took like 2 to 3 months to get those in. In terms of designing the store, right? Like who's going to design it, and how will you lay out the store? And that's what we mean, like fit out the interior, like what's going to go where, and how will the customer like flow through that space? Like who's going to source the fixtures, and what's the lead times? Do they have minimum order quantities? And this is stuff that ends up being like really important in the design and build phase. And go see other dispensaries. Like if you have a medical card, go check out other dispensaries in New York. If you can, come to Ontario. We have 1,600 weed stores up here, right? Go to New Jersey, go to Massachusetts, go to Pennsylvania. Well, actually, Pennsylvania is not rec, but Michigan is, or for whatever reason, like go see other examples and go walk through them and experience them. Or if you're in New York City, and I'm not sure how prevalent it is in Rochester. I was just in New York City, like every other corner has a bodega that has something.
Oh yeah,
right. So go and
very prevalent.
that's really your main competition, if we're being honest here, is the illicit market. And so that it's something to factor in, is just trying to
Well,
go.
I think there's a general understanding that no one's gonna come down on the illicit market until there are actual legal dispensaries.
Mhm. Yeah, and
So-
look, like there's a role for the legacy market, and unfortunately, no market has solved it yet, right? It's
Well, yeah, I mean, people that smoke every day don't want to all of a sudden pay 35% more for their product.
yeah,
I mean, that's a huge amount of money. So, I mean, yeah, I think the legacy market will always be there, but like the bodegas and corner stores that are currently operating, everyone comes to me and says, "Oh no, it's legal." And I'm like, "It is not legal. It is
yeah,
not legal." But no one is gonna come down on them until there is a legal place to purchase it.
yeah, exactly. And hundreds of them, to be honest. So we're a ways away from it. But speaking of that, significant operational challenges is something that we'll talk about next. And again, we have kind of 6 things we focus on: recruitment, training, inventory and cash management, safety generally, and marketing. So in terms of recruitment, I mean, kind of going back to the beginning thing, right? Like people determine success. Like hiring the right people is crucial to building a great store. And there's kind of 3 main steps to that. And first is just like determining your staffing hierarchy, we kind of call it, right? Like what role will the kind of the owners have in operating the business? Like, will you have assistant managers? How many people will have keys to open and close the store? Cross training of staff, right? Like we're starting to see unionization become a big thing in for non-management retail staff. Like how will you manage that? How will that affect your hiring plans, or the compensation structure that you're going to have? Once you kind of decide like who's doing what and the general structure of the store, you can start to think about like how many, like what's your staff coverage? How many people will you need, right? How many hours a day will you be open? How many people will be working, and during what periods? Like what do you think are going to be the busiest periods? Like what's your coverage going to need to be? How will you manage breaks? Like what does that mean for total staff, right? And will you outsource security or do it in-house? And then once you kind of have a sense of how many people you need to operate the business, you can kind of do a job fair like recruiting blitz. And one key thing is like, are you going to hire your management team first and let them be deeply involved in hiring their team, or are you going to hire kind of everyone at the same time? There's no perfect way of doing it. And just like what other tools and are you going to use to screen and vet the capabilities and backgrounds of your potential staff members? We've found that previous retail and customer service experience is an absolutely major asset in the industry, especially for quote unquote bud tenders. Like they're the face of your brand, right? And they're the people who have like the most interaction with your customers, and so that's super important to focus on that. And the next thing we think is important is training. And again, people determining success, right? Like proper training shows up in your customer experience, because your bud tenders are going to be the face of your brand, and through the compliance. And so in terms of training, like thinking about like who's going to do it, like what will it contain, how often are you going to do follow-up sessions after people are onboarded, and how will you train new staff that like kind of weren't there at the beginning and need to get caught up. We're really big on training, not just like operational considerations, but also about the plant and the industry. Because we don't know, we're not really assuming that everyone who wants to work in this space is like a cannabis expert, right? Or how the legal industry operates, and how you need everyone to be kind of dialed in from a compliance perspective. We also think it's really important to do like role playing in terms of like during training, and making sure everyone can actually like do a transaction and work with the tools that you're going to be using to operate the business, and become familiar with like how a customer will flow through your store and create an order and have an order fulfilled. And you'll also learn a lot about people, like maybe someone who you thought was going to be a really good salesperson, like maybe they're not, and that will show up in training. I mean, ultimately, like the two most important things that we think matter, and that's often kind of under appreciated or overlooked during training, is customer experience and regulatory compliance. And these are really important to emphasize during training, because it's your kind of first opportunity to drill home like how important these things are. And when we think about customer experience, like we're not just talking about like shopping experience, but in general, like the totality of their engagement with your brand. And we believe it drives loyalty and lifetime value. It's not just like someone, smiling and greeting a customer when they come in the door. Like that is like the bare minimum of what you can do in terms of providing a good retail experience. But there's a lot of other things. So, how do you answer? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Quick question. I know you're talking about like customer service training right now, but do you guys do any training in good manufacturing processes or practices?
Yeah, I mean, we focus a bit on that, but that would typically be more upstream in cultivation and manufacturing. We talk about compliance in terms of like what is a compliant product, and understanding the production process and like upstream activities. So people are aware of what ought to be occurring, but like GMP stuff is typically more upstream. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Okay. But just to kind of finish up on customer experience, like we really see it as like the totality of the experience, right? Like answering questions in stores. How do you deal with returns and exchanges? How do you answer the phone and respond to emails? Like what's it like to go on your website and shop with you and purchase, a curbside pickup order or reserve something in advance, right? Like how do you respond to reviews on Google? So there's just a lot of stuff that goes into it. And the second thing is compliance. And the real key thing to think about is like, yes, you will have a team working with you, but it's your license. It's not their license. It's your license as the licensee on the line every day. And you are ultimately responsible for all the actions of all your staff while they're inside of your business. And so during training, like you need to have really clear guidelines on just like what are like the red lines of compliance. There's a lot of them, but like a few things to think about, just like underage and intoxicated sales is like an absolutely like can't happen. Access to product and cash, right? You'll hear about like anti-diversion and theft management, like product and cash, like restricted access to that. Health claims about products, absolutely not. Like you're not selling a medicine, you're selling a recreational product. Promoting product in ways that attract youth, like absolutely not, can't happen. So, one thing to keep in mind too is like it won't happen right away, but the OCM, because it happens in every state, will eventually send in mystery shoppers to like audit your compliance, right? You won't know they're from the regulator. Like they'll come in and they're not there to like take your license away, but you definitely don't want to have problems with the regulator. That's not fun. So next thing is inventory management, and put simply, like having the right products in stock is a winning combination for your customer. Seems simple, hard to do in practice. And which products you'll carry and in what amount. So like we call it like the product mix, right? Like what percentage of your inventory is going to be flower versus pre-rolls. In flower, how much of that's going to be in eighths versus ounces, right? Pre-rolls, are you going to have a bunch of singles or multi-packs? When you look at vape cartridges, are you going to have a bunch of carts or disposables? And if they're carts, are you going to have like 510 thread system, which is universal, or a bunch of proprietary vape systems that need their own batteries, which customers don't like, right? Like if you're going to have beverages, will you serve them cold? There's a lot of things to think about in terms of your inventory, but amongst the most important things beyond your product mix is how will you manage aging inventory, and will you have a strategy for discounting? And this is a huge issue in the industry, right? And it all boils down to a pretty simple fact: customers hate buying old weed. So it's a pretty basic thing, and the package date is on the product. It's really easy for them to tell. So how do you manage aging inventory? Well, you make sure you have really good data to help you make good decisions. So as you're receiving product, like capturing as much data as possible about that product so you can make really good decisions in real time about aging inventory. And because you don't want to be
Can I just ask, I'm sorry, I'm complete novice, but like what would constitute an old, like, or too old, like weeks or months or?
According to the manufacturer, weed is good forever. According to customers, like 6 months is like egregious.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and look, it's not apples to apples. Oftentimes manufacturers will include humidipacks inside of their flower containers, right? And they'll have seals, whether it's like my gosh, a foil seal on top of it, and there's a humidipack inside, keeping the flower moist, right, and in nice condition. But the customer doesn't always know that, right? And so, or like at least when they're buying it, you're handing it to them and they look at it, right? So these are just things like you don't want to become known as the store that's always selling old flower, right? Like it's not a good position to occupy in the market. So having a strategy for how you're going to manage aging inventory, because look, you might buy a flower that you think is going to do really well and it doesn't, and oh, we're busy, and oh, we forget, and then all of a sudden it's, you know, that flower is packaged 3 months before you got it, and now it's been 3 months and that flower's old. Like, what are you going to do with it? And so we think that managing that so it hopefully doesn't happen, but also having a strategy for discounting is super important. And it shouldn't just be like discounting should never just be a hasty thing you're doing. It should be part of a marketing strategy, and it should be part of either like trying to move old product or aging product so you can reinvest that capital into products that you think are going to sell well, or products that are already selling well. You could use it to increase basket size, in terms of like the value of what a customer's purchasing every time they shop there, right? By using strategies to give them.
Sorry, this again is just, I'm such a novice.
Yeah.
So like, if it's like old, like, do you still get high or not as high?
No, it's like more of a perception thing than an actual in practice thing, right? Like it's like, okay, does the terpene profile diminish? Does the terpene profile diminish over time? Do the trichomes break down on the flower, which is like the thing that contains the THC, right? Like, yeah, probably. That probably happens, right? Is there great data on it? No, unfortunately not. Do customers hate it? Absolutely. So like, because they hate it, that's really like all that matters, right? But in general, just using discounting as a strategy, we find as a really good tool to drive sales, as opposed to doing something you're doing to just like because you have to do it. The next thing is about cash management, and so we really think in general, as we'll talk about in safety next, like just having really good strategies matters. And so properly managing cash reduces this operational burden to the staff, but also the safety risk. And so again, because of the lack of access to financial services, the number one thing you don't have access to is the ability to use credit cards. Because like Visa and MasterCard, like they just won't process that payment ever until things change. And so that means that you have a lot of cash. Now, thankfully, innovative companies have come up with solutions for how you can use debit cards in dispensaries. So that has significantly reduced the cash burden, but it's still high, right? Like often above 50% for most dispensaries. And that's a lot of cash. So what are you going to do with it? Like, how much are you going to allow it to be in a till on the sales floor, like at any given time? Like, what's your process for getting the cash off the floor, and how are you securely storing it, right? Like, how often will your cash management partner be picking up the cash from your store? And what if you have discrepancies in the cash counts? Like, how is that being investigated, and how, like, what level will be acceptable of an error? And also, just practically, will you have an ATM on site in your store? alluded to
Sorry,
it.
one more
Yeah,
question.
go ahead.
So the ATM, like, I know there's fees to use an ATM. Is it an insanely higher fee because the ATM is in a cannabis store?
Yeah, I mean, look, right now, what's happened is you've got cashless ATMs, which is basically what the concept for like how they do debit at the till, where they'll treat the like they'll say, oh, it's 55. All right, here's $60. You turn around and give them the cash and they give you the change. That's one way to just have an ATM on site if you want. Typically ATM companies don't charge huge fees because they're charging the customer the fee. So like for you to actually have an ATM in your store doesn't often really cost that much because they're making every time someone uses the ATM, they charge the customer. So it's a pretty good thing to have on site for sure, especially if you're in an area where you anticipate there to be like high cash usage. So in terms of safety, like we really think that you can keep your staff and customers safe with the right plans. And it really starts with your security system. And we kind of mean that means like your cameras, your access control, your alarms. Like a good security system is the biggest deterrent to any sort of like theft attempts or any sort of crime. In terms of cameras, like you really want to make sure you're having the whole store covered as well as every entrance and exit. That's another good deterrent. Like if people see that and it's properly covered, like it's a huge deterrent for people. There's also like security film you can get for the windows at the front. So I mean, obviously you're not going to stop like a car from driving through it, but if someone's like trying to hit it with a hammer, let's say, like happened at my dispensary, the windows won't break as easily, and if they do break, they typically like the film keeps them together. So like you like broke it, but like a windshield when you have like a rock hit it or something, right? Same concept. Like it won't shatter; it'll just kind of like splinter a little bit. And just
Sorry,
really,
one more question. Do you guys ever recommend, I mean, in like residential situations, the number one deterrent are dogs? Do you guys ever advocate like guard dogs?
haven't seen it. To be honest, the security camera systems are so good now. Are you thinking more for like after hours or during store operation?
Both.
During store operations, I mean, you're gonna have security guard there, so like that plus system is a pretty big deterrent. I'll talk in a second about like some tools you can have to like in the event something happens. They're panic buttons. No, I don't. I have never heard of somebody using a dog.
Okay, just throwing it
Yeah,
out there.
it's a good point. It's a good point. So that's something
Just
that
a question.
yeah, something I thought about, but I haven't seen it. But in terms of like where you're going to store product on site and where you're going to store cash, designing those and making those safe is extremely important. Some other stuff to think about is just like loitering and belligerent aggressive customers. It's more prevalent in urban environments. Obviously like prevalence of like mental health and challenges and homelessness are higher. It's something we had to manage a bit at our store. Like we were in a pretty urban environment. The unfortunate thing is like these situations can escalate sometimes unnecessarily. But it can happen with any customer really. And so including some de-escalation training is pretty important. But there's just certain times like you're not, if you have a belligerent customer or someone who's just like aggressive, like you might need to call for help, right? And like in general, and especially like on the next point about robbery, like it's an unfortunate problem in our industry. No one needs to be a hero. Like if someone's decided to do this, they're probably willing to harm someone to complete whatever they came to do, right? So like give them whatever they want, cash, product, tech equipment, whatever it is. Like you'll have insurance for all that stuff. And this is kind of something I had mentioned before, but like one of the most important parts of the security system is the silent alarm, the panic button. You're going to have one next to each till that you'll have, and you should have a couple people on the sales floor and your security guard who have either in their pocket or wearing around their neck like a silent alarm that goes straight to 911. Like if that's pressed, basically like the security company will look at the cameras and immediately dispatch police. Like there's no like call this person, make sure they want us to dispatch. It's like you press that button, police are coming. And it's a pretty important thing. Just in general too, like limiting access to sensitive areas, like where product and cash are, and designing them well to limit not even like in a robbery time, just like customers from being able to go there and accidentally or intentionally access those spaces. Something to think about too is like delivery is a really popular concept. It's hard to implement for a variety of reasons, but one thing to think about if you are going to do delivery is just like, how do you keep your staff safe while they're doing deliveries? A lot of people outsource delivery for that reason. It's one thing to think about, is because it will eat into your margin as well. But if you're going to do it, to the extent possible, having multiple staff, a nondescript vehicle, being able to like store products securely in a non-visible spot in the vehicle is pretty important. And then in general, just having good emergency plans and good communication around it. Whether it's for a fire or smoke or evacuation by police for some other reason, a gas leak, and sadly and unfortunately, like active shooter situations, like just making sure everyone's aware of like what to do in those situations, not only for the staff, but customers that are inside the store at the same time. And then
again, question.
Yeah.
Sorry. So for like the security, like you're saying, panic buttons, where anyone can use them. I mean, I know in like cities like Oakland where dispensaries are robbed like on a daily basis, just about. Do you ever find that the police are like, it's the 20th time we've been called today for a dispensary and we don't care anymore?
Yeah. No, we haven't found that. I'm sure every community is different.
That's good.
Yeah, I mean, look, like some of this stuff is sensationalized too, right? Like, that's not to say that these things aren't real problems, but the people who don't want cannabis legalized and don't want it like spreading and having more stores and access to it, like they're very good at making sure everyone knows about all the robberies that happen in the industry. It's definitely an issue, and it's something you need to think about. But
and this is just purely my conjecture.
I haven't known anyone to say that like the police have not been helpful in states that have legalized. Now, like, you brought up Oakland. I don't know. There could be other reasons why the police are not coming. But it's not something that I know to be a existential problem in the industry.
Cool. Thanks.
Just the last thing is like effective marketing requires a really deep understanding of the regulations. Unfortunately, New York has rolled out regs that are not as bad as we've seen, but just as challenging to build a brand inside of these regulations. Like you really have to think about like how are you going to win a customer base, because like just existing and being open is not a strategy, right? Like people will figure out how to communicate and target customers even within these regulatory constraints. And so like, yes, there are major barriers to effective communication and targeting. People will figure it out. Just some examples of the things, right? Like you can't depict cannabis or paraphernalia in the advertising. You can't use colloquial references. You can't show people smoking or vaping. We already talked about not being able to make health claims. You can't promote potency or THC concentration, right? You can't promote price or reductions or discounts or coupons, right? And like often what you'll see is you can't promote those things like outside of the dispensary. There's often, and we're waiting for some guidance on this, but like oftentimes they'll treat inside of the dispensary as one thing and then everywhere else has these other rules. But either way, it's very difficult to target and communicate with customers. And that's why like making sure you have really good data on your own customers is extremely important, because if you already have a relationship with them, you kind of you vetted them, you know they're of age, and you have consent to communicate with them in a bit of a different way than you know anyone else who might be trying to target those people. So that's, yeah, I mean, that's some of the things that we think are important to think about in terms of you know operational challenges. And just to circle back to what we had briefly talked about at the beginning, that we really truly believe that success in retail cannabis is driven by people. And so whether it's the people you hire, people you work with to design and staff your store, your vendors, your product suppliers, the local, you know, municipality and the community, you know, it matters throughout all of the things that you'll do in standing up the business and operating the business. And so, you know, we would love to, you know, have the chance to talk about more what we do. If that's of interest to anyone on the call or anyone who sees this and you want to get in touch, feel free to shoot me an email, add me on LinkedIn. If you have some questions about the industry, you want to just, you know, pick our brains a little bit, like, please feel free to get in touch.
Jeremy, thank you so much. This has been really informative. Really enjoyed it. I just want to remind everyone, for December's topic, we are talking about labor peace agreements, which are a necessary component of, you know, any license that you get through New York State, either as a cultivator or retail dispensary. So we'll have our attorneys from Harder Seacrest talking about that. And we hope to see you there. And for those of you that are watching later that couldn't make it to the live program, please reach out to us. And thank you, Alicia. And thank you, Jeremy. Any last questions? Any last questions? No. Okay, great. We hope to see you in December. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.